I just noticed behind me John Deere tractors. I know a lot about John Deere. I love the company. But as you know, they've announced a few days ago that they're going to...
You might not expect this kind of drama from a company like John Deere. It's one of those names that feels almost woven into the fabric of rural America. Familiar, reliable, and trusted. For nearly 200 years, the green and yellow colors of John Deere machinery have dotted the landscapes of countless farms across the United States. It's a brand that carries a certain kind of legacy, hard work, agricultural innovation, and pride in American industry. But that reputation is now facing its biggest challenge in decades. John Deere has found itself in the middle of a serious political storm, one that involves none other than Donald Trump. The former president and current political heavyweight has taken aim at the company, accusing it of turning its back on American workers. And the reaction? Let's just say it's been loud. At the center of it all is a decision John Deere made recently, one that sparked strong opinions from both supporters and critics. The company announced plans to shift part of its manufacturing operations from the United States to Mexico. For some, this is just another business decision in a globalized economy. For others, it's seen as a betrayal, especially coming from a company that's long been associated with American farming communities and the working class. So how did we get here? To understand the weight of the situation, you need to look at what John Deere represents, not just as a company, but as a symbol. John Deere began back in 1837 when a blacksmith named John Deere noticed that farmers in the American Midwest were having a tough time. The soil in the region was thick and sticky, and the traditional cast-iron plows just weren't doing the job. So he came up with a simple but revolutionary idea, a plow made of polished steel that sliced through the soil more easily. The idea caught on quickly. Farmers loved it and demand grew fast. Before long, that small workshop idea had grown into a full-scale company. Over the years, John Deere expanded its product line, building more and more farming equipment, from plows to tractors to harvesters. By the 20th century, John Deere had become a household name, not just in America, but around the world. It wasn't just a company anymore. It was a cornerstone of agriculture and rural life. Even if you've never stepped foot on a farm, chances are you recognize a John Deere tractor when you see one. That iconic green body with yellow wheels, it's instantly familiar. And for many Americans, it's more than just a piece of machinery. It's a symbol of American resilience, innovation, and independence. But symbols don't exist in a vacuum, and even the most iconic companies still have to make business decisions. The reality is that John Deere has been adapting to changes in the global economy for years. Like many large manufacturers, it has long operated factories in countries outside the United States. The company has facilities in Mexico, Brazil, India, and China, places where it can produce equipment at lower costs and closer to emerging markets. So in that context, the decision to expand manufacturing in Mexico isn't exactly a new or shocking move for John Deere. But this time, the scale of the shift and the timing have drawn a lot more attention, especially in an election year, with Donald Trump back in the spotlight. Trump has built much of his political identity on the idea of protecting American jobs and putting America first. He's known for his strong stance on trade and his willingness to call out companies he believes are hurting the American workforce. So when news broke that John Deere was moving more production to Mexico, Trump didn't hold back. According to statements made during a rally, Trump threatened to impose a 200% tariff on any John Deere products manufactured in Mexico and imported into the United States. That's a massive figure, one that could significantly impact the company's ability to sell its machinery domestically if it were ever implemented. What's interesting here is that this isn't the first time Trump has taken on a major American brand. During his first term in office, he publicly criticized companies like Harley-Davidson for making similar moves. His approach tends to combine public pressure with economic threats, often through tariffs or contract reviews. Whether or not these measures are effective, or even legal in the long run, is a matter of debate, but they do tend to stir up headlines and strong public reactions. As of now, John Deere hasn't publicly backed down from its plans. The company has released statements reinforcing its commitment to American manufacturing, pointing out that it continues to invest billions into US-based operations. At the same time, it's also been clear about the economic pressures it faces: rising labor costs in the U.S., shortages of skilled workers, and a need to remain competitive in a challenging global market. It's a complex situation. On the one hand, there are valid concerns about American jobs being moved overseas. For workers in places like Iowa, where John Deere has operated for generations, the news of more production moving south is understandably upsetting. Factory jobs aren't just employment opportunities, they're often the backbone of entire communities. When a major employer starts shifting operations away, it can leave behind economic uncertainty and frustration. On the other hand, companies like John Deere are also trying to survive and grow in an increasingly competitive world. Global supply chains, automation, and rising production costs mean that businesses often have to make tough choices to remain viable. Moving some production to lower-cost countries isn't necessarily about greed. It can be about staying in business. That's not to say the backlash isn't real. Many Americans feel that corporate loyalty to U.S. workers has eroded over the years. And John Deere, despite its long history and strong branding, isn't immune to that criticism. When a company presents itself as a proud symbol of American industry, decisions that seem to go against that image can trigger strong emotional reactions. But before jumping to conclusions, it's important to understand the reasons behind the move. According to John Deere, this isn't about abandoning the United States. In fact, the company has insisted that it continues to invest heavily in American factories, pointing to billions of dollars spent on modernizing production lines and expanding capacity at home. So, what's really driving the shift? The company says it comes down to two main issues: high labor costs and a shortage of skilled workers in the United States. These aren't new challenges, and John Deere isn't alone in facing them. In fact, for the past decade or more, American manufacturers have been sounding the alarm about a growing gap between the jobs they need to fill and the number of people qualified or willing to do them. Let's start with labor costs. In the U.S., the average hourly wage for a factory worker can range anywhere from $20 to $30, depending on experience, location, and benefits. That doesn't include healthcare, retirement plans, overtime, and other costs that can quickly add up. In comparison, the average wage for a manufacturing worker in Mexico is significantly lower, typically between $5 and $7 per hour. That gap in wages makes a big difference when you're running large-scale production lines and trying to keep costs competitive. For a company like John Deere, which sells expensive machinery to a customer base that's already under financial pressure, keeping prices stable is critical. If the cost of production rises too sharply, that cost may end up being passed on to the customer, in this case, farmers, who may already be stretched thin. Then there's the issue of worker shortages. Despite widespread concerns about unemployment in some sectors, many factories across the United States are struggling to hire. Skilled manufacturing jobs require training and a specific set of technical abilities, and fewer young people are entering the field. At the same time, many older workers are retiring, and there simply aren't enough new hires to replace them. John Deere says it has tried to address this by offering better pay, more benefits, and even signing bonuses in some locations. But in many cases, that still hasn't been enough to fill positions. So from their point of view, moving production to areas where there's a more stable labor pool, like certain parts of Mexico, makes sense. Of course, just because the move might make financial sense doesn't mean it's going over well with everyone. For workers in places like Waterloo and Dubuque, Iowa, where John Deere has been a major employer for generations, the idea of production being shifted elsewhere feels personal. These aren't just jobs being moved on a spreadsheet. They're real livelihoods, with real impacts on families and local economies. It's also not the first time John Deere has moved operations abroad. Over the years, the company has gradually expanded its global footprint, opening factories in countries like Brazil, India, and China. In 2010, they moved some tractor production from Iowa to Mexico. And in 2021, the company announced another shift in cab production south of the border. Each time, the company framed it as part of a broader effort to serve international markets more efficiently and respond to business pressures. But each time, it has also triggered frustration from American workers who see their jobs slowly slipping away. So why is this latest move drawing so much more attention? For one, the scale of it is larger. And two, it comes at a time when political figures are already ramping up rhetoric around jobs, trade, and economic patriotism. That includes Donald Trump, who's used John Deere's decision as a rallying point to criticize outsourcing and call for stronger protections for American labor. It's also being seen by some as part of a broader pattern, one where American companies continue to present themselves as deeply patriotic while quietly moving operations overseas to maximize profits. That contradiction doesn't sit well with everyone. The image of the all-American tractor brand quietly expanding its overseas presence has left a bitter taste in the mouths of many who've supported the brand for decades. From the farmer's point of view, this move adds another layer of uncertainty. John Deere equipment isn't just popular, it's essential. Many farmers rely on the brand not just for tractors and combines, but for the parts, technology, and support that keep their businesses running. If more of the manufacturing is moved abroad, they worry about the possibility of delays, shipping disruptions, and higher prices. In recent years, supply chain issues have already made it harder for farmers to get the equipment and parts they need. Adding more distance between the factory floor and the farm field could make that worse. Then there's the fear that this is just the beginning. Outsourcing doesn't tend to stop once it starts. Today, it might be one production line. Tomorrow, it could be another. Eventually, the core of American manufacturing within a company could become a smaller and smaller piece of the puzzle. That creates long-term uncertainty, not just for factory workers, but for anyone who depends on the products they build. And let's not forget the community impact. In towns where factories serve as the largest employer, every job loss has a ripple effect. Local businesses, from restaurants to schools to service providers, feel the pinch when workers are laid off or hours are cut. Once a company starts scaling back, the entire local economy can take a hit, and the sense of stability that once came from having a big-name employer in town starts to fade. For John Deere, this move may be part of a long-term global strategy to remain competitive, lower costs, and stay ahead in an industry that's constantly evolving. The agricultural market is influenced by global demand, commodity prices, climate trends, and trade policy. That means companies are always trying to be nimble and responsive. But the question is, at what cost? As soon as the news broke about the company moving more of its production to Mexico, Trump didn't waste any time. At a rally in Pennsylvania, he took to the stage and made it very clear that he wasn't going to let it slide. His words were blunt and to the point. If John Deere goes through with this move, he said, he'll slap a 200% tariff on anything the company tries to sell back into the United States. Now, this kind of strong-arm approach isn't new for Trump. It's actually a tactic he used throughout his first term in office. Whether you agree with his politics or not, he's made it clear that keeping jobs in the United States is one of his biggest priorities. During his presidency, he openly criticized companies like General Motors and Harley-Davidson for outsourcing. He often used public pressure, tweets, speeches, rallies, to shame companies that moved operations overseas. In some cases, it worked. In others, it just added more tension between business leaders and the government. So when John Deere made this latest move, it almost seemed inevitable that Trump would respond in a similar way. But a 200% tariff? That's not a minor threat. It's a massive one. If it were actually put in place, it could make John Deere's equipment significantly more expensive. For example, a tractor that currently sells for around $100,000 could suddenly cost $200,000 once it's imported back into the U.S. from Mexico. That's not something most farmers can afford, and the ripple effects could be huge, not just for John Deere, but for the wider agricultural industry. Trump's threat was more than just words at a rally. Behind the scenes, reports suggest that he also asked his administration to start reviewing government contracts held by John Deere. The U.S. government is one of the company's biggest clients, using its equipment for various federal projects, including those related to land management, infrastructure, and even military bases. If those contracts were canceled or redirected, it could cost the company billions in revenue. But what really sets Trump's response apart isn't just the economic pressure. It's the way he frames these issues publicly. Trump knows how to stir public opinion. He knows that many Americans are already frustrated by what they see as a lack of corporate loyalty. And he's tapping into that frustration. using it to build support and turn the heat up on John Deere. It's a strategy that often works, at least in terms of media attention. Within days of his comments, the story had taken over social media. Supporters were calling for boycotts, and hashtags critical of John Deere began trending. Farmers, some of whom have supported the brand for generations, were expressing disappointment and anger. Some even claimed they were done buying John Deere products altogether. A few took to online forums like Reddit to voice their feelings. One user said they were finished with the brand, accusing John Deere of putting shareholders above employees. Another criticized the company's leadership, specifically calling out CEO John May and claiming that the decision to outsource jobs was out of step with the values the company was built on. Some even said they'd sold their John Deere stock or were planning to switch to other equipment brands. From a business standpoint, this kind of backlash is more than just a PR problem. If enough farmers begin turning away from the brand, John Deere could find itself losing a key part of its market, not just in terms of sales, but also long-term customer loyalty. And once that loyalty is broken, it's hard to win back. The broader concern is that Trump's actions could set a precedent. If his threats result in actual tariffs or other penalties, it could signal a shift in how American companies are allowed to do business abroad. The idea that any company moving jobs overseas could suddenly find itself penalized in this way might make businesses think twice. But it also opens up questions about how much control a government should have over private enterprise. That's a debate that's been going on for a long time, especially as globalization has become more entrenched. On one side, there are those who believe that companies should have the freedom to operate wherever they see fit, as long as it's legal and helps them stay competitive. On the other side, there are people who argue that companies benefiting from American infrastructure, tax breaks, and government contracts should be expected to invest in American jobs and communities. Trump's stance leans strongly toward the latter. For him, this isn't just about John Deere. It's about sending a message to every other company that might be considering a similar move. His approach is simple. If you're going to benefit from the American economy, you should also contribute to it by keeping jobs here. And if you don't, you'll pay a price. Critics, however, argue that this kind of policy can backfire. They say it risks turning economic policy into a political weapon, targeting companies not based on long-term strategy, but on headlines and polling numbers. They also raise legal questions. For instance, under international trade agreements like the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, there are certain rules about tariffs that all three countries have agreed to follow. If Trump were to impose a 200% tariff on John Deere imports from Mexico, it could violate those agreements and open the U.S. up to retaliation or legal challenges. And then there's the issue of unintended consequences. While the goal might be to punish John Deere, the reality is that American farmers could end up bearing the brunt of it. If equipment prices skyrocket, farmers who are already dealing with rising costs and unpredictable markets might be forced to delay purchases or look elsewhere. That could put a dent in productivity and profitability, two things the agricultural sector can't really afford right now. Some economists have warned about exactly that. They argue that tariffs don't just hurt the companies being targeted, they also increase costs across the supply chain. In this case, higher equipment prices could mean higher food prices, slower farm output, and added financial pressure on rural communities. It's a domino effect, and once it starts, it's hard to stop. Still, Trump supporters believe the risk is worth it. They argue that without bold action, companies will keep chasing lower labor costs overseas, and American workers will keep losing out. From their perspective, it's time to draw a line, and Trump's aggressive approach might be exactly what's needed to force companies to reconsider. Despite the public pressure and strong political threats, John Deere hasn't backed down. In fact, the company has responded with a tone that's calm, measured, and focused on business fundamentals. While Trump's remarks made headlines and stirred debate, John Deere has chosen to rely on facts, data, and a long-term strategy to justify its recent decisions. In a statement released shortly after Trump's public comments, John Deere reaffirmed its commitment to American manufacturing. The company pointed out that over the past 5 years, it has invested more than $2.5 billion into its U.S. operations. This includes expansions and modernizations in key locations such as Waterloo, Iowa, where high-horsepower tractors are produced, and Des Moines, where new sprayer technology has been rolled out. These are not insignificant developments. They're large-scale investments that suggest the company is still heavily rooted in its home country, even as it makes moves to expand internationally. The statement also made it clear that John Deere employs more than 30,000 people across 60 locations in 16 different U.S. states. From their perspective, shifting some operations to Mexico doesn't mean walking away from America. It means trying to strike a balance, keeping the business healthy while continuing to support a large domestic workforce. In a separate video message posted online, Tammy Hedgren, Vice President of Manufacturing for John Deere's Agriculture and Turf Division, spoke openly about the challenges the company is facing. She highlighted the impact of declining commodity prices and rising interest rates, noting that farmers are currently delaying equipment purchases. This kind of downturn affects every part of the agricultural industry, not just manufacturers. According to Hedgren, John Deere is making difficult decisions not because it wants to, but because it has to. In other words, the shift to Mexico is not about greed or turning away from American workers. It's about adapting to tough economic realities. Sales are down, operational costs are up, and global competition is fierce. To survive in that environment, companies need flexibility. And sometimes that means adjusting where and how things are made. Still, not everyone is convinced. While John Deere's response has been businesslike and professional, critics have questioned whether the company is being fully transparent. Some argue that even if most of the production stays in the U.S., the move sends the wrong message at the wrong time. With workers already feeling insecure and global supply chains still recovering from years of disruption, any shift in manufacturing strategy is going to be met with resistance. And then there's the political angle. Trump's initial reaction was only the beginning. Other political figures have since weighed in, and the conversation has grown louder. Senator Marco Rubio, for example, released a strongly worded letter condemning John Deere's move. He called it a betrayal of American workers and suggested that Congress should look into trade policy changes to discourage companies from outsourcing jobs. His message was clear. If you move jobs abroad, you shouldn't get the same benefits as companies that choose to stay local. Rubio even went as far as suggesting that companies outsourcing American jobs should lose access to tax breaks and government contracts. His argument is based on fairness. Why should taxpayers support companies that aren't supporting American workers? That idea has found support among other politicians, particularly those who are focused on economic nationalism. But it has also sparked concern among business leaders and economists, who warn that such moves could have unintended consequences. One of the loudest voices in that camp is billionaire investor Mark Cuban. He criticized the tariff threats as reckless, warning that punishing companies like John Deere could do more harm than good. According to Cuban, Trump's approach could destabilize the manufacturing sector and damage the reputation of American business as a whole. If companies believe they'll be targeted for making strategic decisions, they might pull back on investment, avoid expansion, or relocate altogether. That kind of uncertainty isn't good for growth. Other business leaders have echoed Cuban's concerns. Bill George, the former CEO of medical technology company Medtronic, said the issue isn't just about John Deere, it's about the future of capitalism in the U.S. He accused Trump of being anti-business, saying that using the government to dictate where companies can and can't operate undermines the principles of a free market economy. Then there's the legal side of things. Some trade experts have pointed out that the U.S. is part of several binding trade agreements, including the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA. These agreements are designed to prevent unfair tariffs and ensure smooth trade between countries. If Trump were to impose a 200% tariff on John Deere products made in Mexico, it could potentially violate those agreements. Gary Huffbauer, a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, has warned that such a move could open the U.S. up to trade disputes or retaliation. He also noted that the government doesn't typically have the legal authority to single out one company for tariffs based solely on its business decisions. Mary Lovely, another trade expert, raised concerns about setting a precedent where individual companies are punished by the government for shifting operations. She argued that it blurs the line between government oversight and corporate autonomy. In her words, it's a government takeover of how businesses allocate their resources, which could have far-reaching implications. Meanwhile, others are asking whether these tariffs would even help the workers they're meant to protect. Ian Sheldon, an agricultural economist, pointed out that hitting John Deere with tariffs wouldn't just hurt the company, it would likely hurt the farmers who rely on their equipment. Higher import costs mean higher prices for machinery, which gets passed on to the end user. And in farming, where profit margins are already tight, that can make a big difference. Sheldon's argument is simple. If you raise the cost of doing business, you make it harder for businesses to operate efficiently. In the long run, that could end up hurting the very communities that politicians are trying to protect. At this stage, John Deere is clearly aware that it's operating in a delicate environment. The company is trying to stay ahead of economic challenges without losing the trust of its customers, workers, and the American public. But that's a tough balance to maintain, especially when the story has become so politically charged. The reality is, this isn't just about one company anymore. It's about a bigger debate over what it means to be an American business in a global world. Should companies prioritize cost efficiency and long-term growth, even if it means moving some jobs abroad? Or should they be expected to stay put, even if that means operating at a higher cost? There's no easy answer. And in today's political climate, every decision carries extra weight. For John Deere, the hope seems to be that continued investment in U.S. operations, combined with a carefully managed global strategy, will be enough to satisfy both business needs and public expectations. But as the pressure builds, from Washington, from media, and from customers, it's clear that the company has a tough road ahead. Trump, on the other hand, sees this as an opportunity. Whether it's part of a broader campaign strategy or a genuine effort to bring jobs back home, he's made it clear that companies like John Deere are now under the microscope. And as more businesses weigh similar moves, they'll be watching closely to see how this situation plays out. The question now is, will John Deere stand its ground, or will the political pressure force a change in course? And if it does hold firm, will it come at the cost of public support and political goodwill? One thing's for sure, this story is far from over.